Imagine 1457. The Ottoman Empire stands at the height of its expansion. Constantinople has fallen. The Balkans are under pressure, and resistance is collapsing across the frontier. Yet in the mountains of Albania, one commander refuses submission. Gjergj Kastrioti, known as Skanderbeg, once trained by the Sultan himself, now stands against him. Facing him, an army estimated in the tens of thousands, disciplined infantry, cavalry, artillery, a force designed to erase rebellion permanently. Skanderbeg commands barely 8,000, many of them farmers and mountaineers, outnumbered, outmatched, isolated. So the question is simple: how do you stop an empire without matching its strength? The answer would unfold in a valley called Albulena, where terrain, patience and timing would outweigh numbers, and where the myth of Ottoman inevitability would be tested. In the years following 1453, the Ottoman Empire moved with renewed confidence across the Balkans. With Constantinople secured, Western expansion no longer appeared uncertain, it appeared systematic. Albania, however, remained outside direct control. For more than 2 decades, Skanderbeg had prevented consolidation in this mountainous corridor. His resistance did not endanger the empire's core, but it obstructed its western projection. The setback at Berat in 1455 altered perceptions. Skanderbeg's forces suffered significant losses, supplies were strained, alliances weakened. Rumours circulated that the Albanian League could no longer sustain prolonged war. For Sultan Mehmed II, this was an opportunity to impose a decisive solution rather than tolerate persistent disruption. The 1457 expedition assembled under experienced commanders, including Isaac Bey Evranoz, and was accompanied by Hamza Kastrioti, Skanderbeg's nephew. The symbolism was unmistakable. A former member of the Albanian resistance would now assist in dismantling it. The campaign was framed not as a raid, but as resolution. Estimates of troop strength differ in surviving accounts, yet the invading force was substantial, likely several tens of thousands. It included Janissary infantry, provincial cavalry, archers, and supporting artillery. Such composition allowed for flexibility in open terrain and sustained pressure against fortified positions. Skanderbeg's available field strength was far smaller, perhaps 8,000 to 10,000 fighters at most. Many were accustomed to mountain warfare rather than prolonged formation battles. Direct confrontation on open ground would have risked irreversible defeat. Avoidance became necessity. Rather than engage immediately, Skanderbeg withdrew into interior highlands. Ottoman forces advanced through central Albania with limited opposition. Villages were emptied, agricultural stores seized or destroyed. Weeks passed without decisive battle. The invading army began to assume that resistance had fragmented. That assumption was strategic leverage. Northern Albania narrows into enclosed valleys and wooded gorges where maneuvering space contracts sharply. Columns elongate. Visual communication breaks down. Numerical advantage, once compressed, loses coherence. By late summer 1457, Ottoman units encamped near the region later identified as Albulena. Contemporary narratives suggest morale remained high. Extended movement without decisive resistance reinforced a belief that Skanderbeg would continue to avoid confrontation. Skanderbeg did not avoid confrontation. He postponed it. Messengers moved discreetly across mountain paths. Units dispersed across surrounding ridges were quietly recalled. Knowledge of terrain was shared among captains. Elevated positions were selected with attention to range, concealment, and exit routes. Coordination replaced speed as priority. Access corridors within the valley were examined. Select routes were intentionally left unobstructed to encourage entry. Others were prepared for sudden closure. Defensive depth was organized in layers rather than a single line. The objective was controlled disruption, not immediate annihilation. When Ottoman forces advanced into the confined space, their formations stretched across the valley floor. Front elements progressed beyond clear support from the rear. Communication slowed as the column elongated. Momentum began to replace coordination. At the chosen moment, withdrawal paths were obstructed. Debris collapsed behind advancing units, restricting retreat. From elevated positions, projectile volleys descended. The intent was to fracture orientation, to transform formation into confusion. Janissary discipline initially stabilised segments of the formation. Shields aligned, orders were relayed, yet terrain restricted effective manoeuvre. Cavalry could not deploy at full capacity. Artillery units found limited space for repositioning. Compression began to undermine strength. Skanderbeg introduced mobile elements in staggered intervals. Light cavalry descended from flanking slopes, striking and withdrawing before counter-response could organise. These engagements were measured, not reckless. The strategy prioritised cumulative destabilisation. The psychological shift proved critical. Units near the rear lost visual awareness of the front. Those at the front faced obstacles and limited manoeuvring space. Sound amplified within the gorge, creating distortion of scale and direction. Confidence eroded. As daylight progressed, structured engagement dissolved into fragmented clashes. Command cohesion weakened. Attempts to establish breakout corridors encountered terrain restrictions and intermittent attacks from elevated positions. Rain began to fall late in the day. Footing deteriorated. Visibility declined further. Neither army achieved immediate dominance. Exhaustion spread through both ranks. Yet Skanderbeg retained a portion of his force uncommitted, a reserve intended for decisive timing rather than early spectacle. Night introduced a second operational phase. Limited visibility reduced the advantage of numerical superiority. Familiarity with terrain became increasingly valuable. Ottoman units attempted consolidation within restricted ground, while Albanian forces repositioned along upper elevations. At a selected interval, renewed pressure was applied from multiple directions. Coordinated signals triggered simultaneous movement along slopes and choke points. Fatigue and compression magnified impact. Fragmented units struggled to regain structure under reduced visibility. The cumulative effect was systemic breakdown rather than sudden collapse. Attempts at organised withdrawal encountered obstructed passages and disrupted pathways. Momentum shifted irreversibly toward the defenders. By dawn, the invading campaign had lost operational coherence. Survivors withdrew from the valley with heavy losses. The engagement at Albulena did not end the wider war, but it reversed immediate momentum and restored strategic balance within the region. The encounter demonstrated that disciplined timing, terrain mastery and calculated restraint could offset numerical disparity. For the Albanian League, survival was secured for the moment. For the Ottoman command, inevitability required reconsideration. And in that narrow valley in 1457, a larger force discovered that expansion is not guaranteed. It must be sustained. When the fighting stopped at Albulena, the Ottoman campaign had failed, not because the empire lacked strength, but because it misjudged terrain, timing and resolve. The invading force withdrew with heavy losses, and the name Skanderbeg carried new weight across the Balkans. For the Albanian League, it was survival. For the Sultan, it was a reminder that expansion was not automatic. The war did not end there. Campaigns would return, pressure would continue. But after 1457, inevitability had been questioned. In a confined valley in northern Albania, numbers were overturned, and time was won.